When I got up to my little room and said my prayers, I did not forget Joe's recommendation, and yet my young mind was in that disturbed and unthankful state that I thought long after I laid me down how common Estella would consider Joe, a mere blacksmith, how thick his boots, and how coarse his hands. I thought how Joe and my sister were then sitting in the kitchen, and how I had come up to bed from the kitchen, and how Miss Havisham and Estella never sat in a kitchen, but were far above the level of such common doings. I fell asleep recalling what I used to do when I was at Miss Havisham's, as though I had been there weeks or months instead of hours, and as though it were quite an old subject of remembrance, instead of one that had arisen only that day. That was a memorable day to me, for it made great changes in me, but it is the same with any life. Imagine one selected day struck out of it, and think how different its course would have been. Pause, you who read this, and think for a moment of the long chain of iron or gold, of thorns or flowers, that would never have bound you but for the formation of the first link on one memorable day. That, my friends, is from this book, Great Expectations, from Charles Dickens. This, my friends, is your Sunday Penguin for the day. So welcome, my friends, welcome to the stately Vaughan Manor and your Sunday Penguin, where I'm finally talking about this book, Great Expectations, which I was going to talk about a year ago and then didn't, and then forgot to talk about it all this time. So I'll talk about it now. Great Expectations by Charles Dickens, which was published in book form in 1861. It was previously serialized in a magazine, Charles Dickens magazine. I think it was all the year round, I believe. It was serialized in that magazine to great success. People were hanging upon every chapter to find out what would happen with Pip and if he would reach his great expectations. So Pip, or Philip Pirrip, no wonder he called himself Pip. So Pip was this kid who was an orphan. Of course he was. It's Charles Dickens. Has to be suffering for the kids in Charles Dickens. So he was an orphan, young Pip, and he lived with his adult sister and her husband, Joe. Joe was a really super nice guy, like the best guy ever. Joe was wonderful. And the sister was terrible and awful, because of course she was. And so Pip lives with these two. And he's kind of a lower class kid, Pip, you know. And one night, he is at the graveyard of his parents. And he's visiting the graves of his parents when suddenly he comes upon a convict, or a convict comes upon him. Anyway, he meets a convict who's shackled, and he needs Pip to steal a file to get him unshackled, and some food because he needs food. And so he's terrifying poor Pip. And what does Pip do? Well, what Pip doesn't know is that this terrifying evening and this frightening man would change his entire life, set his life on a course which he never could have predicted. And it does. So Pip, he does these things, by the way. He brings food, and he steals the file, and the convict runs off and promptly gets recaptured. It's that much I think probably everybody knows about this story, or close to it. There's a lot about this story, Great Expectations. If you haven't read it, I hesitate to give too much away in this story, because the events of the story and the surprises of the story are kind of part of the pleasure of reading this story. So I don't want to give too much away of the plot. So I'm going to be deliberately vague. Needless to say, I will talk about Miss Havisham and Estella. One day, Pip is sent to this rich lady, Miss Havisham's house, kind of keep her adopted daughter company, Estella. And so Miss Havisham is a real kind of weirdo. She's always wearing a wedding dress because she got jilted at the altar years and years before, and it's not really a surprise why. She's kind of a kook, this one. And so she's really bitter and hates men because, of course, she does. And she is training Estella to be just a terrible person who will break men's hearts because she just hates men that much. But Pip just falls in love with Estella right away, and he just wants nothing more than to one day be with Estella. You know, he wants to become a gentleman. He wants to become a gentleman and one day, you know, meet his great expectations and, you know, get together with Estella because she's such a prize. And wouldn't you know it, he mysteriously inherits a lot of dough. Where'd this dough come from? Well, he figures it's got to be from Miss Havisham, right? She's got to want him to, you know, become a gentleman so that he can marry Estella, right? That's got to be what's going on. Well, this book has many twists and turns. And does Pip reach his great expectations? And what happens to Pip as he tries to meet these expectations, as he tries to become a gentleman, and he's feeling all ashamed of his previous life, even of, you know, his great good pal Joe, who's been so kind to him all these years and looked after him all this time. He's being a real jerk to Joe because he's ashamed of him, because he's ashamed of his origin. That's probably too much. I probably said too much about this book, but there's plenty of surprises in store in this book. I mean, it's a classic book, so you might know what all of these surprises are if you haven't read it. But you might not know. I didn't when I read it, actually. I kind of knew basically what it was about, but there's a lot of stuff in this book I didn't see coming. This book is a really, really good book. I didn't think it was going to be when I first read it, or when I first started reading the book. I thought it might be a bit over the top with its characters. Sometimes Charles Dickens did this thing, well, all the time Charles Dickens did this thing where he would just have these kind of over-the-top characters. These characters are always over the top in one way or another. And sometimes he would move into Wilkie Collins territory. Wilkie Collins, the champion of that kind of thing. And certainly with Miss Havisham, for example, we have just a character who's just so extremely weird and eccentric. And there are characters like that in this book who are just so either eccentric or bizarre. They're very much Dickens characters. And sometimes that can be pushed a little far, but it doesn't, but not in this one. Because Dickens is, of course, a really, really skillful writer. So he can balance that kind of thing with seriousness and some serious issues and some serious themes, which this book does have. Certainly the issues of class are pretty serious and were pretty serious at the time. And Pip's feelings of inadequacy, his wanting to move outside of his class and to become a gentleman, his feelings of shame for his own status and for his family, the low-class family that he was from. Those are kind of serious themes, and they're dealt with seriously. And then we also have some fearsome moments, like the convict scene at the beginning. And that whole situation goes in a way that you might not expect. Or you might expect. It's interesting. There's a bunch of stuff that happens in this book that I don't want to talk about because I don't want to spoil it for you, but it's really, really good. It's one of Charles Dickens' best novels, that's for sure. I don't think it's his best novel, although many people think it is. There are so many great things about it, but there are some things that just don't work. The ending doesn't really work. The ending's a little pat. The ending's it's kind of a TV movie of the week, soap opera ending. Well, not a soap opera ending, but like a happy movie kind of ending. And even Charles Dickens knew this. Charles Dickens originally had a different ending to the story, but it wasn't just, happy enough, I guess. So they had to change it, or he felt he needed to change it, so he changed it. The original ending was still not great, but it was better. This Penguin edition has both endings and a discussion about them. And the book itself, overall, though, is really, really good. I happen to think probably Tale from Two Cities is better. I think David Copperfield is probably better. But I certainly understand people who think that this is his best work. There are a lot of people who just love this book, and I completely understand that. It's a really, really good book. Great Expectations. I do really, really like this one. If you like Dickens, you're going to love this. You've probably already read it if you love Dickens, but yeah, definitely it's one of his best. I highly recommend it. If you're interested in Charles Dickens at all and haven't read anything from Dickens, this is actually a pretty good one to start with, I think. It makes pretty gripping reading. The beginning was a little bit clunky in places, but that doesn't last long. I think overall, this is a pretty good read. Excellent book. I really enjoyed it. I said that already. I've talked too long. Okay, my friends. That was your Sunday Penguin, Great Expectations. Catch me tomorrow when I talk about something completely different on the Robert E. Howard Show. A slightly different writer than Charles Dickens. Okay, guys. I will catch you next time.